Hello everyone, it's the Introverted Astrologer and I'm back again today with my take on Nigel Farage and the Reform Party of the United Kingdom. And we're blessed with a rough birth time. I can't tell you what a difference this makes in my ability to make forecasts. And you'll understand why as we go through this video. Now, despite many attempts to become an MP, Nigel Farage has so far been unsuccessful. But he appears to have been growing in intensity and optimism the closer we draw to election day. The question is he going to burst like a balloon or is he going to fly? Now, usually we would start off by looking at the sun, the moon and the ascendant of a chart. But if I told you that this man has a Virgo ascendant, you'd probably be surprised. And that's because we often think of Virgo as being shy, quiet, analytical, meticulous. I can also tell you that Farage's overall signature is in fact that of Virgo, and this surprised me too. This doesn't wholly capture the presentation of Farage in my opinion. So what is going on? The answer is that Nigel has lots of planets and asteroids on his angles. The angles are the sensitive points of our chart, the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, the nadir, and every one of his angles has something on it. When this happens, the energy of these planets or bodies acts in a much more observable and apparent way, and potentially in more extreme ways. These bodies can be mavericks, and this is the case here. Farage was born in the 60s when we had the famous Uranus-Pluto conjunction, and this pair of planets are bang on his ascendant. So this greatly influences the way that Farage presents himself to the world. The energy of these planets is greatly intensified. Many viewers who are in their 50s or early 60s will have this conjunction too. Where it makes significant aspects with personal points or planets, its energy is very much intensified. In this case, Pluto makes the tightest conjunction, so we have to consider that there is a power dynamic in this. We are capable of making big transformations to the environment around us, and we may also seek to gain power and control on the situations around us. And with Uranus nearby, we have that eccentricity. There may potentially be a dash of genius. We can be very restless and extremely freedom-seeking. Farage does describe himself as being libertarian, so there certainly is that freedom-loving streak. But this involvement of Uranus also means we have the potential there for fanaticism, particularly because Pluto is involved too. Pluto, which can represent depth, intensity, obsessions. People with this conjunction of Uranus and Pluto often feel driven to transform and improve the area of life which is impacted. There can be that obsession to make reforms to better society, to purge it of those social ills which we believe hinder or damage our world. And we may be very aware of things like economic growth, environmental conditions, pollution, the social woes that we see as plaguing or affecting our progress as a society. And so as part of this drive, we need to be very careful about our own craving for power too, and be mindful that we can antagonise people around us. We can make enemies because of the Pluto potential for ruthlessness. And we can also deduce, because of this Virgo backdrop, that there will be that search for perfection, the attention to detail, and this burning need to produce outcomes which are functional and effective. We can also see a couple of asteroids down here on the nadir of the chart opposing the midheaven. They add extra details to the main story that the planets are telling us. And because we have a conjunction of these two, I think that's important. The nadir on a chart marks the start of the fourth house using this Placidus house system. And the fourth house is where we find roots, home, ancestry. And in this case, Farage appears to be politically driven by his desire to reform the state of his homeland. There is an intense patriotism there. This asteroid here is called Pallas Athena, and she represents a vision that we have and that we are prepared to fight for. Like a crusade, she can be symbolic of ambition and wisdom. She doesn't necessarily represent attack, but she is very skilled at self-defense. And we have Juno nearby. Modern astrology would view Juno as representing marriage or our long-term personal relationships. And Juno here could potentially indicate to us that Farage prefers it when his long-term relationships or wife is involved in his political work and his campaigning too. Now, we've been given a birth time of 4:30 in the afternoon for Farage, but this comes from somebody's memory, so we need to be aware that it could be a few minutes out. I say this because we have Venus nearby the midheaven, but not tightly conjunct to it. And this kind of conjunction could potentially speak of somebody who has a knack for striking up relationships in their working life, with their colleagues, with people who will help further their career in some way. In fact, Venus here can be a distinct advantage if we are entering into areas like politics, because we can bring Venusian skills such as the ability to negotiate, to exercise diplomacy. Venus is in her traditional home in the sign of Taurus, and so this enhances these skills. But we must also be aware that this Venus is in a T-square with Uranus and Saturn, and so there will likely be considerable difficulties with other people too. We may have an underlying fear of rejection. There could be low self-worth. Our personal relationships may be subject to a certain amount of tension, overreactivity and touchiness. The Sun in Farage's chart shows his life purpose, his consciousness, his identity, and it's situated in a very intense part of his chart, here in the sign of Aries and in the 8th house. The 8th house is a house of intensity. There is crisis, obsessions, change, rebirth. And what is noticeable is that the Sun is not very well aspected by other planets. We do have this very wide conjunction to his Mars, which is also in Aries and in the 8th. That Mars is in its natural home because it rules Aries. We have this considerable emphasis on Aries energy. Aries is a very independent, impulsive and self-orientated kind of energy. With this kind of emphasis, we can be certain that Farage will have his own interests at heart as well. There will be this terrific concentration on the advancement of ourself and of our objectives and our needs. And so behind any political campaigning, we need to be aware of this background urge to fulfill our own needs too. Now, the importance of ideology and belief systems is present because we've got that moon in Sagittarius. It's trine with Jupiter. That Jupiter is in Aries and is again part of the 8th house cluster of planets. So there is this drive for truth-seeking. We're thirsty for knowledge. We're very optimistic and fiery. We have great enthusiasm and faith. And this Jupiter is conjunct to the ruler of the chart, which is of course Mercury, which rules Virgo. So these make an out-of-sign conjunction. And they pretty much sum up Nigel Farage's articulacy, his gift for being able to make speeches, the boundless energy he has in pursuing his own ideological beliefs. We can also see that this moon is in a wide square with his Mars in the 8th house. So again, we have a certain volatility here and that emphasis too on our own needs. The Mars in this chart is also heightened for a few other reasons. It's the ultimate dispositor of quite a few planets, including the Sun, Jupiter, the Moon and Saturn. Moreover, it is in a position that is called on the bendings because it is square to the nodes. We have the North Node here and the South Node here, and Mars is very tightly square to both of them. This means that this Mars can act in a more exaggerated fashion. And so again, we are back to this strong Aryan theme of independence, of force, and of fulfilling our own needs too. Now, before we move on to making short-term forecasts about Farage's future, I'll just point out that this Jupiter and the Uranus don't have a strong relationship in this chart, which shows longitudinal positions, but they are very tightly parallel to each other in a different measurement, which is called the declinations. I won't go into that here, but suffice to say that these two are so tightly together in the declinations that we can be sure that their energy will influence Farage's life. It may be that they bring fortunate connections, excellent timing at certain points that will enable him to seize opportunities. And there could also be, again, this great thirst for knowledge. Now here we have Nigel Farage's progressions and solar arcs. Their positions have all been calculated for the 4th of July, which is election day. And you can see the progressed planets placed around the outside of his natal birth chart. A question we could ask ourselves is why Farage has appeared on the political scene again, rather unexpectedly. We will find some of these answers by looking at his progressed sun, and we can see it up here moving through his 10th house, and we can see that it is drawing into a square with his natal Pluto. That Pluto is conjunct his ascendant, and the progressed sun is squaring them both. And so with this square, we are likely to feel a strong drive for control, potentially the need for power, and we may well also experience conflict and power struggles during this drive to regenerate ourselves. And this is an aspect which has been growing and growing in intensity since the second part of 2023, because there is that simultaneous square with the ascendant. The urge for professional success will have been quite intense. We will feel this need to achieve our life goals, to reinvigorate our relationships and aim for professional success. And there will be that urge for self-expression. These will be dominant themes over the months leading up to exactitude, which is around this kind of time. So this helps us partly understand why there will have been this need to let everybody know about the things that we have achieved and to capitalise on these. There has been that simultaneous need for control and a will to power, and the square aspect also suggests some difficulty or friction. So there is a risk that Farage may overstep the mark or take this too far occasionally. We also do have another very significant progression in the background, and this is that progressed Jupiter is now forming a trine aspect with that natal ascendant and of course with Pluto too. The orbs are so narrow that we are nearly exact even as I make this video. What does this tell us? Jupiter represents betterment, plenty, enlightenment, success. And the combination with Pluto means that we may be successful in achieving positions of power, of being successful in the goals that we are aiming for. For some people, this drive for betterment, for plenty, for power may be expressed in quite spiritual ways, and we may thirst for a deep and all-encompassing understanding of the truths underlying life, and we may seek to enhance our control over ourselves. But for other people, this can be expressed as literally an urge to gain power over other people. It's a matter of perspective. However, if we have this aspect drawing together in the progressions at a time when we are seeking political power, then this is undeniably most auspicious. The connection implies lucky breaks, good fortune, a time of success and advancement, of successfully pushing forward and achieving our life aims. We can also see that the progressed midheaven is now at 1 degree and 42 of Leo. This means that it is slowly drawing into a square with Farage's natal Mercury. This Mercury is the ruler of his Gemini midheaven because Mercury rules Gemini. And so the drawing together of these two positions in the progressions is very important. There is this strong urge to communicate and push for recognition of our public standing, of our status and reputation, and we're likely to feel increasingly driven to open up all avenues of communicating with the world around us, to be advertising and using media, to be forming connections with people, to further our midheaven goals. Can we pick up anything else in the progressions? Our progressed moon can also make passing aspects with our natal planets and points. A significant aspect that we can see is that this progressed moon will begin entering into an opposition with this natal Uranus shortly after the election. Its influence will likely be felt around election time. And it shows a few weeks where we may well have an element of unpredictability, the unpleasant surprise or shock. There could be disruptions that we weren't anticipating. We do also have another method of prediction, and this is where we use solar arcs. These are the planets that are placed around the inner birth chart in blue. And using this method, every planet, regardless of its speed, is moved forward roughly 1 degree for every year of our life. Now, there are some very significant solar arc aspects that will become exact around election time, and so I'll list those on the screen now. Jupiter to the moon, for example, can indicate burgeoning optimism, but it can also indicate great happiness. And solar arc Venus, making an aspect with natal Jupiter, can indicate good fortune and happiness in our relationships. And so here we have the transits on the day, on the 4th of July. Once again, Nigel's birth chart is placed in the centre, and around the edge we can see the positions of the transiting planets on the day. Mars will be at around 18 degrees of Taurus, and so it isn't causing any bother. The Sun will be moving between 12 and 13 degrees of Cancer, and so there will be some passing tension with his natal Sun, but at the same time we have that sextile with his ascendant and his Pluto. I don't see this as detracting from his chances on the day. Venus will be around 21 degrees of Cancer during the course of the day and is doing very little to the chart. Mercury is quite a neutral planet, so although it is moving through 2 and 3 degrees of Leo, it will square his natal Mercury. But more than anything, this simply emphasises the relentless communication and interaction that will be going on during this day for him. And we can also see that it will be trine to his natal Mars, so this will greatly help him in promoting an enthusiastic and goal-focused persona. But we can also see Jupiter is nearby, a very sensitive personal point. It is sitting on his midheaven, the midheaven which is our career, our status, our public standing. And one really couldn't hope for a more fortunate or benevolent contact on an election day. I do have to introduce a word of caution here. That birth time from memory sounds too exact, i.e. 4:30. So we know that this Jupiter is in the area of his midheaven, but just being a few minutes out on the birth time can change the midheaven by 1 or more degrees. It's quite a fast moving point. So I can tentatively tell you that this is a very good sign, but it is subject to you understanding that the accuracy of the birth time affects this forecast too. The fact also that transiting Jupiter will be going on to move through Farage's 10th house over the course of the summer, and that it will stay in this house until well into 2025 shows us that Farage can expect growth, good luck and opportunities in his career. I have to say that on balance, I do believe that this Jupiter in the area of the midheaven and the 10th house, accompanied by the very powerful progression between Jupiter and natal Pluto, the involvement of the ascendant, do all incline me to believe that Farage is likely going to be successful in becoming elected as MP. I suspect there will be power struggles as that transiting Jupiter moves further away after the election and begins to make square aspects with the ascendant and that natal Pluto. But nonetheless, I believe this will be a time of significant achievement for Farage. I hope this analysis was useful for you, whichever way you're voting. Let's hope that we're all feeling a little bit more optimistic by the 5th of July. And it's less than a fortnight to go now. This is going to fly. And I wish you and yours the very best. Take care and God bless.